As Michael H. Arth pointed out, quote, genes are just molecules and they can easily be destroyed by heat, by radiation, or by dangerous chemicals in the outside world. To protect themselves, the genes construct a container around themselves to keep out harmful chemicals and radiation, a quote, house, close quote, with thermostat that keeps the temperature nearly constant. If the house, i.e. the human being or animal produced by the genes, is well designed, then the genes can survive and replicate. If the house has serious defects, the genes inside it will die. This is why we sometimes can experience the effect of genetic similarity theory as immortality, as expressed by this image and this interview with famous movie actor Heath Ledger.
Hollywood shocker, shocking death, Heath Ledger, an Oscar-nominated actor, dead at only age 28. He leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter, Matilda. He was asked how having a child changed his life.
Child, I guess, and I think you also look at death differently. Like, it's like a catch-22. Like, I feel good about dying now because I feel like I'm alive in her, you know, but at the same hand, you don't want to die because you want to be around for the rest of her life. It's kind of like a...
As the genes live on and can continue to be expressed. Like already mentioned, genetic replication seems to be valued in light of the analogy given to us by journalists, author, philosopher, business consultant, and editor Jared Taylor here.
There's more to it even than culture. There's a kind of biological continuity here. You find some people saying, okay, I don't care if the United States even continue to be white, so long as the people who are living on this continent continue to believe in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democracy, etc., etc. I don't believe that way at all. If I were content with that, I would be perfectly happy for intelligent robots to be carrying out my culture. I don't want intelligent robots to be doing it. I want my descendants and the people I'm related to be doing it. It's a kind of generational familiar thing. I think every group, every society has the right to preserve itself, and preservation is both a biological and a cultural preservation.
When black people say, no, I want my children to marry black people and I want my descendants to continue to be black, there's nothing, that's not considered hateful. Or if Jews say, you know, of course I want my children to marry other Jews. We wish to continue to be Jews. That's normal. That's healthy. But if a white person says, yeah, my ancestors have been white for 1,000 years and I'd like my descendants to continue to be white.
I don't know. What do you prefer? I mean, when you're called a racist or a supremacist, that's not accurate. So how do you describe yourself?
Well, you see, that's a very good question. The funny thing is there's no good expression for it because what I think about race is what everybody in America thought about race up until about the 1950s or 60s. It would be like people who look after their own children and care about them more than they care about the children of strangers. You don't have a special name for that because everybody does that. Now, if you suddenly got into some nightmare society in which you were supposed to put your children in some sort of collective child rearing and care just as much about other people's children as your own children, then they might come up with some word that's the equivalent of racist and say, oh, these terrible familists. And what would you call yourself? You'd say, well, wait a minute, I'm just normal. I'm normal. I'm a healthy human being. Well, that's the way I feel.
He also says human nature can be changed. Well, that reminds me of an attempt made to change human nature that dates back to the early part of the 20th century. Communism. Communism was based on a very appealing idea, the idea that somehow human nature could be changed, that selfishness could be overcome, that people really could be taught to live from each according to his ability to each according to his need. This was a very appealing idea. Almost as appealing, perhaps, as the notion that race could be made not to matter. The Soviet Union staggered on under this idea for 70 years. Many other nations attempted it. Why did communism fail? Why did this noble view of human nature fall asunder? Because it was a misreading of human nature. We now understand that there is a certain basic selfishness in human beings that it is folly to attempt to overcome. We must harness that selfishness by means of the free market, and that makes a better and more successful society, not this happy notion that somehow selfishness can be made to go away. It doesn't work. It didn't work. And likewise, it is not going to work, this idea that race can be made to go away. We have to be realistic. Professor March says there's no such thing as human nature. Well, look at history. Look at every society. One example that I would give is this. I love my children more than I love the children of anyone else in the world. And I make no apologies for that. There have been attempts to raise children communally, in communes, and say, no, no, that's selfishness, that's wrong. You can't care more for your children than my children. Didn't work. People care for their own children more than they care for the children of others. It's human nature. Furthermore, I would make an analogy a little bit further. I don't love my children more than I love the children of others because they're objectively superior. I love them because they're mine. That's all it takes. And it doesn't mean that I dislike your children. In fact, I can work up quite an affection, perhaps, for your children. I feel no hostility for your children. But my children come first because they are mine. Now, a race is a person's extended family. It is the largest group to which human beings feel a kind of natural, instinctive loyalty. It is their large, large family. And they have a loyalty to their race that is like my love for my children. It is one that puts a certain group first without the slightest hostility to any other group.
It is true that when whites had no experience of other races, when they were strictly within the European continent, the only people they saw were whites, there were all sorts of conflicts based on religion, based on nationality and language, as I said previously. But in the larger scheme of things, when whites moved to the same place, as they did in the United States, they do assimilate in a way that people from other races do not. Whites have come from all countries in Europe, and after a few generations, they're essentially indistinguishable in terms of education, in terms of income, and likewise in terms of who they're likely to marry. People who are from other races, they remain distinct in all sorts of ways, generation after generation.
It works when the immigrants are largely the same race. You have a proper and effective melting pot. After a couple of generations, as Professor March suggests, you can't tell a Frenchman from an Italian from a German unless they stay in Quebec. Now, race is a different matter. You have had Native Americans here for centuries, and still you have a terrible problem because the difference is racial. I feel that wanting your people and your culture to survive is healthy and normal. Every other group, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, they all feel that way. But it's only if whites express that sentiment that somehow they're insulted, called white supremacists, as if I wanted to rule over other people. Crazy. I just want to be left alone. Let my culture unfold as it should.